Hello and welcome to this demonstration on Zephyr Scale, which is a test management solution that resides inside Jira. In this demonstration, we are going to focus on the functionality of Zephyr Scale Server and Data Center. So for those of you who are brand new to test management, what Zephyr Scale allows you to do is manage various testing activities within your Jira instance. This will allow for better collaboration between the development and the test team, and also between the test team themselves, as it is an online centralized platform for the entire team to work from. Okay, so let's have a little explore here of the Zephyr Scale plugin. I'm just going to navigate to a project here that we will work from for the demonstration. And if you're wondering how to get started, you can download a trial from the Atlassian marketplace for Zephyr Scale Server or Data Center. And then you can come in here to the project settings in Jira. You can then navigate down to the Zephyr Scale tab. And within here is where you can enable Zephyr Scale for your projects. So you'll see here there's the option to toggle on and off for each project within your Jira instance. Now there are other configurations here, such as issue types you'd like to use, traceability, and also the permissions across your users. Okay, so once that's enabled, if we now navigate to tests, we will have access to the additional functionality that the Zephyr Scale plugin enables. So we're going to be focusing on the four main areas here that are in the menu. So the test section is where you will come to create test cases, edit test cases, or import existing test cases or export test cases. So it's all about building out those test cases. Once you have those organized, then you can plan those tests into cycles. And here is also where you will assign those tests to various testers. And then we have the top level. If you want to, you can also then plan cycles into a master plan. So if you have a number of cycles that should abide by similar, perhaps documentation or strategies, you can connect cycles to a master plan. And then, of course, you can report on all of this using the Zephyr Scale reports, as well as the reports available in the Jira dashboard. Okay, so these are the main elements we're going to walk through. Just some other considerations about Zephyr Scale. The first thing to note is the test cases that we create in Zephyr Scale are not Jira issue types. They are their own Zephyr Scale test case, and they're stored within their own database within Zephyr Scale. So one of the major benefits of this is that we're not leveraging or putting pressure on your Jira performance, because the issue types are actually just their own Zephyr Scale test case rather than using the issue type test case that's in the Jira database. Okay. As well, we do have a full Zephyr Scale REST API that you can work with. This is especially useful if you have automated test cases and you want to be able to execute test cases using your automation framework and then post results into your Zephyr Scale using the API. And that's actually documented here in our documentation. If I just navigate to this tab here, you'll be able to see exactly what's available in the API and all the relevant details here and resources. Okay, as well, to get started, this demonstration will give you a great idea as to how to get started and where to go. But if you need any further information, we have fully documented all of the various aspects, whether it's setting it up, getting started, creating test cases, cycles, plans. It's all here ready to be consumed. Okay, and just an additional note is that if you are a Jira user, you may be familiar with the script runner plugin. So if you want to further automate processes within your Jira instance, you can actually use Script Runner alongside Zephyr Scale to do things like, for example, if a cycle is complete, maybe you want to automatically send an email to the test manager. Okay. All right, so let's just go through the interfaces now and go through a sample flow. So as I mentioned, the first area we're going to look at here are the tests. And in this screen is where we will manage everything. And you'll see that the test tab is highlighted. And if we look at the structure here, we have all of our test cases in a folder structure here on the left-hand side. To get started with this, you can just use the Create New Folder and name that folder something meaningful. And once that's done, it will be added to the list. And you can also add subfolders. So it does support subfolder organization. So depending on how you like to arrange your work, you can create as many subfolders as you need to and name them whatever is meaningful for you and your team. Okay? Just something to note that some test management solutions don't allow you to do this multi-level folder structure. So just something to be mindful of. Okay, and then you can manage these either in their own folders. For example, all of the test cases related to contact management can be stored here. Or of course, you can just look at all test cases in this view and see all of the test cases in this project. In this particular view, you can customize what you're seeing here on screen. So for example, we can go to the custom view here and choose the columns that we want to see or that we don't want to see. Okay. And you can also add various filters in. So if you know you're constantly coming back and searching similar items for test cases, you can add that as a filter and then use the saved filters here to navigate through this data. Now, as I mentioned, if you want to get started, you have two choices. You can create a brand new test case here using the new test case option. That will give you a blank test case to fill in. Or if you have existing test cases that you want to import, you can use this drop down here and either import from other Zephyr Scale projects or import from various files. And you'll see it's quite straightforward. Once I click on import from file, I now have a menu of options that I can import from. So another Zephyr Scale project, a CSV file, other solutions. So you'll see here it's quite flexible. And in addition to these other solutions, you can also import using the REST API. And regardless of which one you work with, there is always going to be some kind of flow that will help guide you through the importing. So if there's any setup configuration, then there's the mapping screen where you can say, okay, for this field in my source, I want to map it to this field in Zephyr Scale. So it's really, really straightforward. It's extremely common for Zephyr Scale users to be coming from somewhere where they've had data already. And we want to make sure that you can easily import that data and get started straight away and not have to rework anything or re-add in things that you've already worked on. Okay, so that is how you can import. Some other options here on this screen is if I was to select a number of test cases, I have options such as archiving. So if you wanted to archive a test case, what that will do is place it here in the archive test cases, and that's essentially a soft delete. If you then want to go ahead and actually delete that completely, you can also then come in here and delete anything that needs to be removed for the rest of time. Okay, so back to all test cases, some other options you can do here is if you wanted to, you could create a test cycle directly from your test case repository. Now that might be good if you really quickly needed to execute just a handful of test cases, but my preference or the best practice, I believe, would be to create all your test cases, get them into your project, and once you're happy, then go to the cycles area and create a cycle and pull test cases into that cycle. And I feel that it's easier just to manage when you kind of plan out your cycle from the cycle down. However, if you do need to start with the test cases and create a cycle from those, you can absolutely do that just using this button here. Some other options available here are if you want to clone any test cases, so that allows you to just reuse work you've already done. You can add test cases in bulk or edit them in bulk as well. So you can edit them on this screen, or we can create test cases in bulk here. And then you can also export into various formats. Okay, so as you can see, that's quite a very straightforward UI. The only other thing I want to mention on this screen is that if you're doing your import, or if you're just reviewing the test cases and you find that there's custom fields that you are used to using or that you want to use, you can configure them here on the top right in the configuration settings. So this will bring you to all the various sections that you configure. So if you want to add in any custom labels, or maybe you want different statuses for your test cases or your test executions, maybe you have different ones here that are different to the usual pass fail blocked. You can add them in here really easily. You can do this as well to the actual test cases. And it's really straightforward. You would just type in the name of the field here and then choose the field type. So should it be a date picker, a number? Should it be a user on the team? Should it be text field or multiple choice? You can select that all here. So really, really configurable, really easy to use. Okay, so that is the test case screen. Let's now actually open up a test case as well so you can see what's typically in a test case. So I'm just going to navigate down here to my create contacts test case, and we'll have a look at the structure of a test case. Okay, so in this example, we're going to go through a manual test case where you're kind of adding in all the details, and all test cases are separated into different sections. So your details tab, your script, your execution, your traceability, attachments, comments, and history. Now you don't have to use all of these areas, but I'm going to show you them all and you can decide then. So within the details tab, we have the name section. So that would be the name of your test case. We then have the objective if you want to provide more information about what this test case is doing. You can also add any preconditions. And then there's other information here like the status of the test case. Maybe you want to assign it to somebody, or maybe you want to add in various labels so that you can later report on these labels. Any custom fields that I have added will be shown here in the more information. Okay, so that's just an example of the details tab. The next tab here is where you'll actually write out your test case. And there's a couple of options. The first option here is plain text. So if you just want to write in the test steps using text, you can do so. If you're using BDD, you can write out your features here in Gherkin script. So the keywords are supported. For example, when I do X and X equals Y and so on. So you can create those scenarios here. Or the third option is step by step. And this is probably the most common option. And basically when you come in here, you can navigate to the first column and it will give you the option to add in a step. Now I've already added a bunch of steps here, but if we wanted to add an additional one, I just click the add step and then I can choose to add in the actual step detail. I can choose to add in any test data and I can choose to add in the expected result. Okay, so let's just say test step and then that's done. Now I can also clone test steps. So if you want to be able to reuse them, you can. You can also attach files to a test step. And what's really useful here as well is that you can call other tests into this test. So a really good example of this is that if you created a test case called login, and you know that a lot of your test cases are going to use that, what you can do is if you're creating a new test case that uses login, rather than rewriting the steps, I can use this call to test and say, actually, I'm just going to pull in the login test steps from the login test case. Okay, so you could just select that here and then click add, and it will actually call that into your test. Okay, so you can see there it's done that. Now I had already done that, that's why there are two. But that is how that would work. And just something else to note here is that when I go to call to test, I'm not restricted to calling test cases from just one project. I can call them from the other projects that I have permissions or access to as well. So that's a really good benefit of Zephyr Scale, is that you essentially have access to all test cases in all projects if you have the correct permissions. So it's really giving the team a global repository of test cases. Sometimes I've even seen people organize test cases into folders called reusable test cases. So that might be useful. You could even have a project called reusable test cases, and that way people would be able to go there and see if there's something they could use. Okay, so that is how you can call another test into this test. And if I was to expand this, you can actually see those steps from the other test that we called. Okay, so that just makes it really, really easy and all about reusability and saving time for the team. Now, if you have data that you want to push through your test steps, you can add a test data table here. So you can add in different rows. And then if I navigate down to a step here, actually that's the one we called, so let's do it here. If this was blank and we said, okay, I actually want to pull in the name column from that table, you can just open curly bracket and start searching, and it will link to that data table above. And in this example, because I've pulled in 4 columns, when the tester goes to execute this test, it will show the tester the script except with the value from the table. So for example, they will see the name Sarah and the email sarah@sarah.com. And it will actually give that tester 4 different test scripts to execute, because there's basically 4 different entries here. Okay, so test data is really useful. There's also parameterization if you want to parameterize certain steps as well. All right, so that is how you would get your test script in there. The next section in the test case is the execution. And this is essentially your execution history. So you can see when it was executed and what the status of that execution was and what iteration it was executed as part of. Okay, then the next area here is traceability. And this is one of the major benefits of using a test management plugin that lives inside Jira, because what it allows you to do is create connections between your Jira stories, otherwise known as requirements, and also any defects. Now, we'll typically link defects to test executions, but if you do that, it will show here as well as part of that test case. So if I executed this test case, which I have done, and I create a defect, it will show here. That's why you're seeing these. For the stories, it will not automatically link a test case to a story, because you need to choose, okay, what stories is this test case relevant to? And to make that linkage, you can just come up here and use the search item and say, I want to link this test case to a particular story. So in this example, I'm just going to search story, and it will show me then some stories that I have available. And I can say, okay, I want to link it to this, click add. And now we've created that linkage. And what that means is that when we are in the reporting section, we will have full traceability all the way from the story to the test cases that are linked to that story, to the execution of the test cases, and to any defects created. Now, you can also do this the other way around. So if you are working in a story, and as you're writing that story, you would like to link the story to various test cases, you can do that here in the traceability section and say, I would like to link this to an existing test case. And that will bring up this window where, again, you can choose from which project you want to pull in the test case from, and you can select the test case or multiple test cases. Okay, so that is how you can create the linkage from both sides. If you don't have a test case created, you can also directly create a new one here from within that story. And vice versa, if you don't have a story, you can create a new one here using the plus button. Okay, so that is what the issues section is used for. It's all about creating linkages and having full traceability across your testing activities. Now, if you're a Confluence user, you can also create a linkage between your Zephyr Scale and Confluence pages. Or if there's some other kind of platform that you're using, you can also link to various web links. So that's traceability. Then the next section, you can add in any attachments that might be relevant for that test case. You can also add in comments. So if you need to collaborate as a team, maybe before the test case is in approved status, you have questions like, why did you include X? You can there collaborate within the comments section. And then here in the history, this is where you can not only see any changes, but you can also see versions of the test case. So for example, if I expand version 1 here, within that version, I can see who made changes and what those changes were. Okay, so that's the first thing, and it will give you a time and date stamp. And if I had added more changes on other days, it would show that as well. But then as well, if for some reason you want to add in a new version, but you want to maintain the old version, you can, I just need to make sure I've saved anything. You can say, hey, I want to create a new version. Okay, so what that will do is create version 3 of the test case, and then you can do whatever it is you need to do, make whatever updates you need to do. But this time now, if I go into history, I can see version 3. And the great thing about this is that you can then specify which version it is you want to use for that particular cycle or that execution, and you can execute that. But if you ever need to go back and execute an older version, you'll always have the option to, because you can see the other versions are still intact. You can also compare versions. So if you want to understand what changed, I obviously didn't make any changes there. It's just changing the date of creation, but you would see a side-by-side comparison of what changes were made between test cases. So that's incredibly important, just to be able to understand who made changes, when those changes were made, and to be able to revert back at any time. Okay, so in summary, they are all the main sections of a test case. Again, I'm showing you all of them. You don't need to use every single tab we've gone through, but hopefully that makes a little more sense now that we've explained them in detail. Okay, so that is the tests section in a very quick summary. And that is where you manage all of your tests. And just to recap, this is where you can import them. You can create test cases. You can also create test cases in bulk, like I mentioned, as well as doing things like exporting or creating cycles using the create test cycle. So you have many, many options here that are only available because you're using the Zephyr Scale plugin. All right, so now that we have our test cases in, let's go to cycles. And this is where you can plan out your cycles. Now, this screen is similar to the test screen, whereby you organize your cycles into various folders. So depending on what makes sense, you might have a folder for regression cycles, for automated tests, whatever works for you. Here I can see all the test cycles because I'm in all cycles, and I can also see the status of those cycles as well as the planned start and end date. Now, again, you can customize the view here. So depending on what you want to see, you can update that here. Now, if you want to, you can run a cycle directly from here by clicking on it or by clicking on run, or we can clone a cycle, or we can edit a cycle. So if you're happy with the structure, rather than having to recreate the cycle every time, you can just clone that and reuse the work you've already put in. You can, of course, create a new cycle. So to do that, you would just click new, and then it brings me into a blank cycle where I can now add in the information. And I'm just going to open one that I've already done, just so we can look at some more meaningful data. So if we go to regression 1 and click edit, I can see here's the name of my cycle, a description of what this cycle is doing. You can then update certain fields. You can assign it to somebody. You can add in the planned start and end date, which is really important. And of course, if you have any custom fields, they'll show here in the more information. Then here on the test cases tab is where you'll choose the test cases that should be run as part of this cycle. And you can do that just by clicking the add test cases here. And again, you can navigate, you can either use the folder-based structure and click test cases in this way, or you can go to all test cases. You can also select them all if you want to do it all in one go. You can also add filters, and you can also hide test cases that have already been added to avoid any duplication. You can also choose test cases from multiple projects. Like I mentioned, Zephyr Scale is built with reusability and efficiency in mind. So it's a really great feature to be able to pick and choose from whatever project you want. Okay, so I've already added in my test cases here. And the next step then would be to move to the assign column and start assigning testers to various test cases. And to do that, you can just use this select, and it's very straightforward. You can also, if I was to bulk tick a couple here, you can do a bulk assignment. And you can also assign other parameters like the environment, the version, the iteration. So it just makes it easier. For example, if you wanted to say, okay, these test cases need to be ran on Windows and using the Firefox browser. Okay. So once you have the test cases added and you've assigned the tester, then there are a couple of other things you can do here. For example, if you wanted to link this cycle to perhaps a plan, like I mentioned, you can create master plans, and we'll look at that in a moment. Or you can also link it to any web link or Confluence page or any issues within your Jira instance. There's also a section for attachments. If there's anything that needs to be shared regarding the entire cycle, you can add attachments, you can add comments, and again, there's a history of changes for the cycle. Okay, so that is the main elements of a cycle. What you'll end up having is, a number of cycles here, and maybe you'll organize all your regression cycles together. And then if you want to run that, like I mentioned, you can select and click run, or we can just dive right in there. And we are now in the test player section of cycles. So this is where the execution happens. And on the left-hand side here is where those 19 test cases that we added to our cycle are showing. And you can configure how you want to view these. So maybe you want to view them by priority and see the test cases that are highest priority, and maybe you'll want to execute those first. Or as a tester, perhaps you just want to see test cases assigned to me. So I can tick that, and it will only show test cases assigned to me. Or as a manager, maybe you want to group them by various testers. And again, that will show, test cases assigned to Justin, test cases assigned to Lorna, and so on. So it's all about just making it as user-friendly as possible and, giving the testers a good view to test from so that they can easily dive straight into the test that they need to execute. So in this example, let's go to that create contacts test case that we were looking at earlier. And you'll see here that we already have an execution done. So if I minimize that, you can see any executions that I've already done. So because this is a demo instance, I've actually done a couple of executions. But if this was your first time coming in here and nothing had been executed, it will give you a blank test case like so, with nothing being edited. So, it will be a not executed status. The timer will not have started. And if we navigate down here, none of the steps have been executed. Okay, so because this is kind of a fresh one, as a tester, what I'll do now is just say, okay, I'm going to start testing. I'll click the start button. That will push my test case into in progress status. And then I will navigate to my steps and I can start passing, failing them. So I'll open my app, and if that works, I'll pass it. I'll launch my application. If that works, I'll pass it. I'll enter a username. If that works, I'll pass it, and so on. So then you just navigate through. If you need to fail a step, you can use the X. If you need to block a step, you can say this is blocked because the previous step failed. And these are just the shortcuts here. So pass, fail, block, but you can also avail of the other statuses that are in the system by just using the 3 dots. Now, earlier I mentioned if you were to parameterize your data, it will pull in the information from your table, or excuse me, if you were to use the test data table. So that's what's happening here. And because I had a number of rows of data, it will now create multiple scripts. So the first script will use the first row of data, the second script will use the second row of data, and so on. So that's just something to think of. And again, if data testing is important to you, it's really important that you have a tool that allows you to do this and can track the separate executions depending on which data was used. Okay, and then let's just look at what else you can do here from the execution screen. You can create a bug directly from a step. So if there is a defect or a failure, you can create that here. You can attach a file. If you need to attach maybe proof of execution, you can attach files to a step. Or you can also do this to the test case level. So if you wanted to attach a video or an image to the entire test case, you'll do this up here. And if you want to create a defect to the entire test case, you'll do that here. So let's imagine we did have a failure. We want to create a defect. Just select the bug issue type, and then you can enter in, whatever that defect is. You can put in some meaningful information here on what the defect is about or what caused the defect, and you can click create. Okay, so now what we've done is, as a tester, I've executed my test case. I have come across a step that has failed, and now I've raised a defect. And now this defect exists in Jira for that developer to review and fix. So that will get added to their backlog. They can come in here, they can see what test cases are related to this defect and perhaps what cycles this defect is, or this test case is within, and also if it's blocking any other particular test cases. Okay, so it's giving you that end-to-end traceability, and again, it'll tell you what it's blocking or what it's, I guess, preventing from getting done. So this just allows you obviously to prioritize your work better. Okay, and then what would happen is, if then, a couple of days passes and the developers say, oh, it's fixed, rather than having to replan this test case for a new cycle, you can just come in and start a new execution. And that will give you the blank slate of the test case again, and you can go ahead, start your timer, and execute the test case. Okay, so if I minimize there, you'll just see the one that we just executed, and then I can create a brand new execution just using the start new test execution. Okay, so that is how you use the test player. And again, you can configure everything you're seeing here in terms of like what you want to see here and how you want to organize your work. All right, so that is cycles. The next area I want to look at is plans. And again, this is optional. It's just another way to manage your work. So we have tests at the very granular level. Then we organize those tests into cycles. And then if we want to, we can now organize these cycles into plans. And you'll see here, it's the similar structure again, where you organize all your work into various folders. And then you can use the new option to create a plan. Or of course, you can clone current plans that are already there. And if we just jump into this plan that I have created, it just allows you to maybe set out the strategy that should be abided by for multiple cycles. So if you're working on a big project and you need to share information with all of the test team that relates to all cycles, what you can do is put that information here in the plan. So what's the name of the plan? What's the objective of this plan? And then you could include as much information here as you want. Things like what's the overall strategy, assumptions, environments that you need to have set up, risks, and so on. And then once you've entered all that information in, you can go to traceability and say, okay, so within this plan, I want to link cycle regression 1, regression 2, 3, and 4 to this plan. And again, to do that, you just use the search and you choose whichever cycle it is that you want to associate to this plan. And what that means is that when we go to reporting, we just have an additional hierarchy to report on a higher level. So we can say report on the functional master plan, and that will then automatically bring in the details from these 4 cycles, rather than you having to manually pull in those cycles when you're configuring the dashboard or the report. Okay, so that is what the planning section is for. Okay, the final section then here we're going to look at is the reporting section. And again, there are reports available here within the Zephyr Scale plugin, and there's also reports available within the Jira dashboard. But within the plugin here, you'll see there's over 70 different reports that you now have because you're using the Zephyr Scale plugin, and they're organized into different sections here: test execution, test library, issues, so if you want to report on all the defects, and traceability. Now, of course, it's hard to demonstrate this in a short period of time. So I would recommend, as part of your trial or your evaluation, check out what these reports are like. What is common throughout the reports is that whatever report you pick, there will be some kind of configuration that you can do. So you can be very specific whether you want to report on one project or across multiple projects, and whether you want to filter on a particular cycle or version or a folder or some kind of custom query. Okay, so depending on which report you want to run, there'll always be some configuration available to the user. One of the reports I find that's really useful, or even more useful than the others, would be the traceability report. So I mentioned this earlier, the ability to have that full traceability across your testing activities. So let's just click generate here. And what it does is show you, if you're working from an epic level, it will include that. But what's really important here are these columns, because we can now see coverage so that we can see for each story how many test cases were linked to that one story, what the execution of those test cases is, and if any defects were added as part of that execution, it would show here. Okay, so it's giving us this end-to-end. If you were not to use a plugin in Jira, you would have your requirements in Jira, your tests outside of Jira, and the execution outside of Jira, and then there would be some kind of a manual process to get the defects into Jira. But because with Zephyr Scale, you can do all of these things within Jira, it just means now that we can report on all of this, and we have one online platform that has all the information we need. Okay, and I find that this is just really good to identify any gaps with coverage. You can see test cases that were created but do not have any stories. And like I mentioned again, if there was defects, they would be listed here, and you can click right into them. There's always hyperlinks like there are here where I can click right into a test case. This also helps you gain confidence as to whether you have enough use cases for each of your stories, because as the lead, you can read the story and then read the test cases that the team have come up with. And maybe you'll be very satisfied, or maybe you'll also say, no, I can think of a couple more. I'd be much more confident if we added in a few more test cases before we gave the go decision for the release. Okay, so I just think this is really, really powerful and definitely something to be used. Okay, so there are just some of the reports, as I mentioned, over 70 that come within the Zephyr Scale plugin. And in addition to that, we can navigate here to the Jira dashboards, and we can create our own dashboard that pulls in information on the testing activities. Okay, so I already have pulled in some gadgets here. And again, it's difficult to demo this, but hopefully it gives you a good idea. You can see things like the execution status of the test cases. You can see the top 10 defects impacting testing, your results overall, and the different priorities, and so on. There's many things here. You can have an activity stream and follow, what's happening or what's happened over the last period of time. And you can edit this layout as well as add in your gadgets. So when you go to add gadget, you can then choose from all of these gadgets here as to what you want to add in. And so again, depending on which gadget you pick, as you click add gadgets, they will be added in the background. So you can add in multiple gadgets, and then you can come in here and define what should be in that gadget. Okay, so things like which project information, do I want to filter by something, and so on. And then it will create this nice dashboard for you, and that will be available for you anytime you come back here. Okay, so in short, that is Zephyr Scale. And as I mentioned, the functionality is similar for server and data center. And to recap, the main areas that you'll be working from here are the tests area, the cycles area, the plans area, and the reports area. If you want to customize any of the fields, you can do that here in the configuration. And then as well, for your automated tests, you can use our REST API to post results into Zephyr Scale. For example, here, I have posted in some automated tests from my Test Complete automation tool. So what I've done, and I actually have it open here, is I've created some tests here in Test Complete. And then I've created a script that will post the results of these tests into my Zephyr Scale. And once I run these, it will give me the results obviously within my automation tool. So here I have 3 passes, a fail, and a warning. But it will also then, as the final step, post those results into my automated test cases. Okay? So these are the same test cases, and I have the statuses of those tests: passed, failed, or passed with warning. So that is how you can use Zephyr Scale for both your manual and your automated tests. And those results from the automated tests are now rolled up into the reports alongside your manual tests. Okay, so I will leave the presentation at that. There are other integrations available, so if you're curious about anything in particular, please get in touch. For example, for reporting, we also integrate with Confluence and EasyBI. So if there's any questions, you can reach out to your SmartBear account manager. You can pose the question through our support team, or you can also navigate to our documentation here. And there are many, many resources within this documentation, whether it's written documentation, videos, blogs, webinars, etc. Thank you again for joining this demonstration of Zephyr Scale, which is SmartBear's test management solution that is a plugin with inside your Jira instance.